So for the last tutorial I'm going to look at digestion. So we'll be looking at the key organs of the digestive system, enzymes involved, small intestine adaptations, and also these new kind of superfoods which help us digest stuff. So the whole point of the digestive system is to convert large insoluble molecules like starch, which is a huge molecule, into small soluble ones. So by the time they get from the mouth to the small intestine, which is the last point for food, it's a point of no return. If they're not small enough, you see, if they're not soluble, if they can't get dissolved into the bloodstream, they'll just pass through our system and we won't benefit from that food. So if they're soluble, they'll actually go into our bloodstream. So what are the key organs? Firstly, mouth obviously physically breaks down food. So over here we're having physical breakdown of food, and your saliva contains amylase, which is an enzyme which breaks down starch into glucose. So amylase is also in your mouth, in your salivary glands, in your saliva. Once that happens, the food will travel down your esophagus or your food pipe by a process called Then we enter the stomach, and the stomach, obviously we have an acid bath. We have hydrochloric acid in our stomachs which help break down food further. The stomach physically churns the food to break it down further, and also there are enzymes in the stomach called pepsin, which you might have seen in the enzyme topic, is breaks down proteins into amino acids. Once we finish with the stomach, the food passes into the small intestine. But here, before you think it's the last stage, loads of stuff happens in the small intestine. Firstly, you get enzymes injected from the pancreas into the small intestine, because remember, this is the last point, the point of no return. So we've got to make sure that that food is totally mashed up. So we have enzymes like lipase, which digests fats, amylase, which digests starch, and trypsin, which digests proteins into their constituent parts, which I'll go on to the next slide. It really is like a complete all-out assault on food at this point. Also, another very important point here is your liver produces something called bile, which is stored in your gallbladder and then released into the small intestine. Now, bile has two very important functions. Firstly, it's alkaline, so it neutralizes the stomach acid, because otherwise you'd be digesting your own small intestines, because your stomach has a special lining to protect it from the acid, but nothing else does. And also, it digests fats by emulsification. It's an emulsifier. That means that obviously normally water and fats can't mix, but bile allows them to mix so that the enzymes in the water can meet the fats and break them down. So without an emulsifier such as bile, we wouldn't be able to break down our fats. Once that's done, when it's all broken down, then we get absorption into the small intestine. So it might be worth taking a snapshot of this screen because it summarizes it all. But firstly we have amylase, which is active in the mouth and the small intestine, and it converts starch to glucose, which is a tiny molecule that combines to itself repeatedly to make up starch. Pepsin is found in the stomach, and it digests proteins into amino acids, which is what proteins are made from. Lipase, think of liposuction, so it's found in the small intestine, and it digests fats into glycerol and fatty acids, the two things that make up fats. And then finally, trypsin, found in the small intestine, it does the same thing as pepsin. It digests proteins into amino acids. As I said, maybe take a snapshot of this, because it is, if you get 6 mark on this, everything you need to know is on this little table. You just need to turn it into sentences. So next, let's look at the small intestine. So the small intestine has its work cut out for it. Basically, it's got to continually absorb food, as much nutrition as it can, to keep you alive. To do this, it has a number of villi, which are kind of like projections, which then, if you use the microscope to look at further, you'd see that they themselves divide into a number of microvilli, further extensions. And what that does is, microvilli create a large surface area for absorption. Notice how these 3 words come up again and again in biology. Large surface area, really key point. Also, you would notice that the villi or the villus are surrounded by loads of blood capillaries, and that's to ensure that, again, they create a large surface area for the soluble materials to be transported into. So we could say they're surrounded by a huge capillary network. Also, if you to look inside the villi, you'd find that they have very thin walls, and that's to create a very short diffusion distance. That means food will be absorbed very quickly by the small intestine. That question has come up, I think, more than any other question again. If it comes up again, I'll almost be quite surprised, but I think you'd be quite foolish not to revise this, because it has been the most popular question. How is the small intestine adapted to perform its job? Finally, healthy foods. There are 3 you need to know, and for some reason, because this hasn't come up in a lot of detail, I'm sort of thinking this might be a potential 6 marker. That's why I've slipped it in here. So there are probiotics, prebiotics, which you may have seen before as oligosaccharides. What a horrible word. Oligosaccharides, or a nice word, depends how you look at it, really. Stanol esters are the last one. So probiotics are basically foods which contain good bacteria, and that allows the bacteria to colonize your gut, so they take up space, and therefore they can compete with any harmful bacteria and stop them colonizing your gut, which could make you very ill. So probiotics are very good. Prebiotics are basically food for the good bacteria to help them grow. Okay, so things like leeks and oats, they contain oligosaccharides, which are a form of sugar, if you like, and they're not useful to us. We won't digest them, but the bacteria will, and it allows them to grow and protect you still further. And finally, stanol esters, you may have seen on many adverts, they're put inside certain margarines and so on to reduce your cholesterol. So yeah, just be aware that could be a 4 to 6 marker. It hasn't come up before in any significant detail, so I'm kind of expecting that one. Alright, that's it, done.